This next question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. Does he have a name? From Rick.
Possibly Ruben.
I came upon a wrestling poster from the late 1990s that advertised a show by the Jersey Shore. There were plenty of legends and WWF names. What stood out to me was an advertised live debate between Jim Cornette and Captain Lou Albano. I feel like if this were possible today, it would draw the house. Does Jim recall the content of this debate? Did it get over with the crowd? How many times may this have happened? Thanks again, loyal listener here.
That was a Dennis Coralluzzo show.
Yep.
And Dennis loved to do shit like a debate between me and Captain Lou Albano, or arm wrestling, Sonny versus Marlena with Nick Bockwinkel as referee, or what? I don't think that one happened.
No. I can tell you exactly what happened there. Sonny no-showed. That was at the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl in 1998 because I was doing commentary with Nick Bockwinkel, and Sonny no-showed. So you had Marlena and no Sonny, who lived in the state.
Yeah, it was actually, she was the closest one to the building. But I can't remember what we said. We went out. It was, does he have the town or the building there on the question? Or
he doesn't, but I just saw the image. I'll pull it up.
It was one of those New Jersey towns that Dennis ran, and it was just a small gym or whatever. And we just went out and cut a promo on each other. And I was the heel and he was the baby face at that point. And I'm sure that he got the last word, or we did something to put him or his guys over in the end, and I scampered out of the ring or whatever, but I can't remember. It's been 25 years. I don't know.
All right, here's the card. July 23rd, 1998, Wildwood Convention Center, Wildwood, New Jersey, NWA Pro Wrestling.
There you go, Wildwood, New Jersey.
8 p.m.
I remember it because Crockett ran Wildwood, New Jersey in 1985. That's the first time we went to New Jersey. It's when he was doing some of those northern excursions into Vinceland. I did the local promo. I said, Wildwood, where all the women are wild and all the men would. Go ahead.
I did not hear that before. I believe it used to be a Gorilla Monsoon town for the WWF, but here is the lineup on the poster. Hey, big news, special appearance by Doink the Clown.
Which one was it, you think?
Well, you know what? The one who I thought it may have been, it couldn't have been by this point. Because when I went in 94 to the NWA tournament and I was hanging out with Tracy Smothers, the guy who started talking to me that was Doink that day was Mike Maraldo. Before he had ever done anything, before he was Ace Darling, I think. But I don't think he would have been by here. And of course, the second match for the NWA light heavyweight title, Devon Storm versus Ace Darling. And a lot of people may not realize it, but that was kind of like a big indie match in New Jersey at that time. They were a team, but they also had matches against each other.
Devon Storm and Devon Storm later became Crowbar in WCW. And Ace Darling, as you mentioned, was Mike Maraldo. And they were a team that I managed on a number of occasions. Dennis loved using them, but also that was one of the high-profile mid-late 90s indie matches, such as they were back then. And those guys were very good. I booked them a lot on, as extra work in WWF when I had the chance to and the opportunity to. And they were two of the better workers on the independents at that point.
Unfortunately, there wasn't a Ring of Honor, and the tape trading for the indies wasn't what it would be a few years later, but there's like almost a whole class of Northeast indie guys from the late 90s. Before he was Simon Diamond, when he was Lance Diamond, Patch, the Reckless Youth. You had a whole bunch of guys working for Jim Kentner, working for Dennis, working other indies in the area. Young guys in shape, able to work. And it was like the timing was just a little bit off, I think.
There's just no place for him to go.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to this show. Live debate between Captain Lou Albano and WWF's Jim Cornette.
Well, now, wait, how come Captain Lou wasn't WWF's Captain Lou? He was there longer than I was.
Someone probably asked them.
He belonged to the world at that point.
And Vince didn't want anything to do with it. The next match.
Now, hold on. Here's one thing. The answer to the trivia question of what wrestling talent has been fired most often by any iteration of the WWF, it would be Lou Albano.
Well, I don't know.
Vince Sr. used to fire him almost every month at the Garden if he'd show up drunk and then hire him back 2 or 3 days later, right?
Yeah, because Bruno would go into, oh, come on, Lou, he's got the family. Oh, he's drunk. Oh.
He's a good guy.
Well, I don't know if he got fired the most because the next match was for that championship. Jimmy Superfly Snuka versus the Iron Sheik.
Oh, well, there's a challenge for you. Yes, and here's another reason why a lot of the indie guys of that era are unheralded today, because the tape trading, nobody wanted the tapes of these shows because these shows were designed to sell tickets in the building. And absolutely, we say it now, only the AEW type fans really goes to see the great matches involving people that nobody's ever heard of. But these shows in those days had to sell tickets. And to sell tickets, you needed to have names that people knew. Everybody who knew who Jimmy Snuka was, everybody knew who all these ex-WWF guys were in Jersey or New York or the Northeast. So they would be booked to sell the tickets. Problem was, they had shitty fucking matches because it's these big stars that are just doing this for the payoff and they don't give a shit. And they're in a fucking rec center somewhere. So that's why the underneath guys that really could go, that were the young guys that were on the underneath matches in these programs, a lot of times they didn't get seen because nobody wanted tapes of these cards after they were held because the main event matches sucked.
That's exactly right. I mean, Iron Sheik versus Jimmy Snuka sounds bad. There were so many Jimmy Snuka Metal Maniac matches nonstop in the Northeast for years.
Yeah.
You didn't want to see the undercard. You didn't want to trade for those tapes. That's exactly right. And really, until Ring of Honor, there was no market for indie shows without name talent. Because there was no indie market for independent wrestling, not towards a general public. It was the first time indie wrestling was targeted specifically towards an indie wrestling audience.
Well, remember, there was no indie wrestling until the 90s. There was Outlaws every once in a while, but there was really no true independent wrestling on any kind of widespread basis until the territories went away and it became the Wild West and everybody could just say, oh, we're wrestling, and nobody knew the difference. So indie shows were a brand new thing at that point.
Also on the card, Jim, King Kong Bundy versus Tito Santana.
There you go. And Dennis loved Bundy and I loved Bundy. What a great guy Bundy was. And Bundy was from New Jersey, and it's an easy way to come and pick up $500 or whatever. But does anybody?
Tito.
And so's Tito. He's teaching school there, and everybody knew who they were, and they came to see him. And we're not talking about. I mean, you've been to many of Dennis's shows, and I mean, there were stinkers. No doubt about it.
Oh yeah,
Yardville, New Jersey, or whatever. But on a lot of these shows, Dennis and Frank Goodman, they're in New York, and some of the other local promoters were selling 1,000, 1,500 tickets to the general population of this town. It wasn't smart fans traveling in to see this shit. It was everybody that lived in goddamn Teterboro, New Jersey, and bringing their kids.
And specifically to this, Wildwood is a major beach town. So you have a lot of people who travel to Wildwood for the weekends. You have a lot of people from out of town. You also have a lot of people who are just hanging out on the beach. If you see a card for a wrestling show and there are names from your youth or names from just a few years off TV, that would get those people into the show.
Well, theoretically it would, but as I recall, one thing I do recall, Wildwood wasn't worth shit.
In 98?
As far as the house went, because that's for what you just mentioned. Years ago that worked, but at that point, if you're on vacation, the last thing you want to do is go in and see some kind of outlaw wrestling show, right? The shows that Dennis did that were the most successful were the ones where he was just in a regular town with a good local sponsor or some kind of local hookup for advertising, where he could push those tickets to the groups and etc. And that's where and everybody would come to see Jimmy Snuka in person or King Kong Bundy or whatever the case, because they knew who they were, and you'd have 30% of the crowd would be kids.
Woodbury, New Jersey, I think, was the place where I saw the best Dennis shows consistently.
And that was his hometown, so he was hooked up. He knew who everybody was, so he knew how to get publicity, and he knew, et cetera. But it was a completely different business model, completely different time in the business. And like you said, until Ring of Honor, where they specifically put all the independent wrestlers who nobody had ever heard of, but who actually could go and do shit, could work, could have good matches, when they put them all together, and there was no audience in any one market big enough to support that kind of wrestling show. But by selling the tapes all around the world, that's how they were able to make it go for a while. Because there was enough people in the whole world to buy the tapes to allow this to continue. It just couldn't get any bigger. That's the problem that Kerry Silkin and everybody else had. It couldn't get big enough to sustain itself just doing that.
And I remember what a big deal it was at the time for Dennis and everyone involved with Dennis to actually get Wildwood. That was like a commodity. You wanted that town for the summer months, for the beach crowd. And
well, do you remember, was I just there on a bad night? I don't remember that being a good crowd or a good town. I wasn't there, I think, the once.
I wasn't at the show, but again, this show's Thursday, July 23rd, not Friday, not Saturday. Thursday, July 23rd, with the main event from the World Wrestling Federation, the Headbangers versus the Pitbulls.
And what year was that? Again, did they have the year?
Thursday, July 23rd, 1998, 8 p.m. at the Wildwood Convention Center in Wildwood, New Jersey.
Yeah, and that's when I was booking the third-party shows. The guys that weren't booked on the cards, they could go out and make extra money by doing independent shows if it was cleared by the office, and I was the official office clearer. And so Dennis loved the Headbangers because Glenn and Chaz are from that area also, and they worked hard. They actually went out and tried to have a good match because they weren't old, beat up, and set in their ways as of yet.
And they started with Dennis.
And they started with Dennis as the Spiders. So that was an easy thing, and they always wanted to be on the shows, and they always wanted to work hard. So that was an easy deal to put together there. But, again, that's the thing, is that a lot of the guys in the WWE in those days that weren't booked on every house show, that weren't being used regularly, they could still be booked out if it was approved by the office so they could make some extra money. This was before everybody was on a ludicrous guaranteed contract. And some guys would just make a minimum, if they weren't booked all the time. So Road Dogg and Billy Gunn were on that crew for a while, where they weren't using them before they started with the whole DX thing. But I would try to get those guys booked on these independent shows because it could make them an extra payoff, and at the same time help the good local promoters out to keep their areas that they ran in strong. And then they would develop some of these guys on their own, like the Ace Darlings and Devon Storms, and then they'd get experience on those shows, and I could call and get them for television. And if they looked good on doing jobs on TV, then it wasn't unheard of that somebody might get a job every once in a while out of that. That's the way that all worked. But then what happened after I came back to Louisville in 99, and right about that same time, and everybody had been making money from the Attitude Era, but so many of the guys, but I won't say so many, but the guys started getting hurt, or they'd be on a show, after I was gone, and whoever was doing it afterwards, and probably didn't put a lot of effort into it, but they didn't know who all the promoters were. They're just looking at it like, okay, now this is a business, and if a promoter calls and wants a talent, then we'll find him a talent and we'll make a booking fee. No, if some jack-off that I knew ran bullshit shows called, we don't have anybody. But if it was a good guy like a Jimmy Kettner or Blaine DeSantis up there in Reading, or people that I knew ran quality shows over a long period of time and would help the young guys get started, them I'd try to find somebody they could sell some tickets on. And when that was over with and it was other people, then the guys were going out on shows where they were doing stupid bullshit or bad juice or street fight matches or bad publicity or a bad ring and get hurt or whatever, and they just cut it all out entirely. And that's when nobody could go and work. Well, for a while, you could go and work third-party promotions for autograph signings or appearances, but not matches. And then I think they cut all that out, too. But I used to be able to get some of these guys, Kane, $5,000. This was 25 years ago, to go to a shopping mall for 3 hours. Austin got $25,000 for a 2-hour autograph session. Some of those big malls in Connecticut on more than one occasion.